In 2019, YouTube was caught violating the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Since settling, YouTube has enacted new policies that are meant to serve as a smokescreen so they can dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. As such, for my own protection, it is my obligation to advise you that this video is not aimed at children. My target audience is not children. Parental discretion is advised. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Whoops, hit my mic. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. It's still the 50th anniversary of the Master. Boy, it feels like that kind of loses its luster every time I mention it. But anyway, since it still is, it's time for more Master content. So today, I will be reviewing Missy, Series 2, released in July of 2020, directed by Samuel Clemens and Ken Bentley. Missy Series 2 stars Michelle Gomez as Missy and also features Rufus Hound, Gina McKee, and Dan Starkey. As always, there is a possibility I will be discussing spoilers because I do this unscripted, so just in case there is a blanket spoiler warning in place. If you do not wish to be spoiled for Missy Series 2, in the description box below will be the link to Big Finish's website where you can purchase it. Missy Series 2 consists of 4 stories: The Lumiat by Lisa McMullen, Brimstone and Terror by Roy Gill, Treason and Plot by Gemma Aerosmith, and Too Many Masters by John Dorney. So, let's break down each story individually and talk about them, starting with The Lumiat. The Lumiat opens with Missy wanting to see what the Doctor gets out of it, kidnapping someone to be her companion. Meanwhile, a bunch of Missy's plots are mysteriously stopped by a woman she believes to be the Doctor. Over the course of this story, Missy continues a string of insane schemes trying to draw this woman out and confront her. When we finally get the truth, this woman, the titular Lumiat, is not the Doctor. She is the Master. So, before I go any further into that, let me just say, Michelle Gomez is absolutely brilliant. Like, she is so insane, but there's always this undertone of menace, And I've said this before, that's where Michelle Gomez succeeds, where John Sim fails, because essentially on paper, they are playing the same kind of Master. Very manic, very crazy energy. But Sim could never be threatening. He was always so over the top and goofy, whereas Gomez, even at her craziest, she still has this undertone of menace. Like, she goes over the top like John Sim, but she manages to tone it down enough that she can still be imposing. And she is glorious here. Gina McKee as the Lumiat is also really good. And boy, I mean that as a pun too. She is a good version of the Master, but as the story goes on, you realize she is still the Master, so she's still really freaking insane. When Missy eventually gets fed up with this companion she kidnapped, a young man named Bertram, she kills him. And on the spot, the Lumiat holds an impromptu funeral service for him. And from that point on, the story evolves into Missy refusing to believe she will become the Lumiat, while the Lumiat tries to convince Missy to be a better person. Under the guise of trying to find the Doctor, so looking for trouble across the universe, the Lumiat is trying to convince Missy, to solve the problems herself, which, Missy, being Missy, absolutely refuses to do. So the Lumiat, what exactly is she? Well, if you remember the Series 10 finale, The Doctor Falls, the John Sim Master, realizing Missy was going to stand with the Doctor, shot her with his laser screwdriver, and he told her, don't bother trying to regenerate, you got the full blast. So, on her deathbed, Missy created something called an Elysium Field, forbidden Time Lord technology, because of course, it's always forbidden Time Lord technology. And, what she did is, it was the only way to kickstart a new cycle of regenerations. But in doing so, The Lumiat, which she created, is a distillation of all of the good inside the Master, however little that is. In other words, she is the Master's Valyard. You know, which they even reference in this story. However, as the story goes on, the Lumiat begins to despair because Missy refuses to be good, and when she realizes Missy is about to start essentially a nuclear apocalypse, the Lumiat finally decides to fight back, which leads to Missy killing her. And then, of course, you know, the Lumiat starts to curse and insult Missy as she dies, which Missy, you know, points out that wasn't very nice. Gina McKee and Michelle Gomez are great together. You know, they're two halves of the same coin. You know, you have Missy as the good, the Lumiat as the... Missy is the bad, the Lumiat as the good, and they're both just freaking insane. And this story ends with the Lumiat regenerating, which Big Finish didn't plan it at the time, but the implication now is that she regenerated into Sasha Dhawan, which I really love. You know, of course, Dhawan came after Missy, because there's this debate in the fandom right now that Missy was the final incarnation of the Master and died, and Dhawan came before her. One, you know, the Master's timeline is already a mess. Like, I always point this out in his regeneration cycle. It went Roger Delgado, Jeffrey Beavers, Peter Pratt, Jeffrey Beavers, Anthony Ainley, Jeffrey Beavers, Eric Roberts, Jeffrey Beavers. You know, the expanded universe has already made the Master's timeline a mess. The show itself is not going to do that. Two, it's the Master. There was only ever going to be one opportunity where the Master would be good, and it was going to stick. And because of Roger Delgado's passing, the final game never got produced. So, yeah, no, you know, and, you know, if the Master is going to be good, it's not going to be entirely altruistic, you know, like in The Good Master from the War Master Series 1. And finally, it's the Master. You know, a lot of people are like, and, you know, I've seen this too, a lot of people are like, oh, but the Master said she got the full blast. How did she survive? There's an explanation for that in Classic Who. It's the Master. That's all you're going to get. And, you know, while we do get an explanation, you know, I feel like Dhawan plays on that trope, which I really like. Oh, the bottom line is, on that tangent, wow, I never liked the Dhawan is pre-Missy fan theory, and the Lumiat really, for me, destroys that theory. Okay, moving on to Brimstone and Terror. So now, oh, also, by the way, I should mention this too. The stories are all fairly standalone, but across Series 2, there is this overarching plot of, you know, at the end of Series 1, Missy got this thing called the Master TARDIS, which, as the name implies, allows her to bend all other TARDISes to her will. And now, at the start of Series 2, and throughout the set, there's this overarching plot that the Master TARDIS isn't working for her. So while doing her own thing, she's trying to figure out what's going on. Anyway, so Series 2 also is a direct sequel to a story from Series 1. The Brimstone and Terror is a sequel to A Spoonful of Mayhem. You know, which was basically a play on all of the Missy is Mary Poppins jokes everyone made that were never funny. Well, until A Spoonful of Mayhem. So basically, after the end of A Spoonful of Mayhem, Oliver, one of Missy's charges, has been sent to a military boarding school that Missy has now taken over and is posing as the head mistress. And of course, later, and basically she is coercing Oliver to write fake letters to his father telling him everything is okay. In a nice touch, I should have listened to Series 1 again. I think one of these letters is actually Oliver's closing monologue from the end of A Spoonful of Mayhem in Series 1. And of course, Lucy realizes that Oliver is lying and shows up to try and help him stop Missy. But she didn't come alone. On her way to Scotland to this boarding school, she met someone who was on holiday. Someone from Paternoster Row. Yep, Strax is in this story, and Strax is amazing. One of my big critiques about this story is that Missy and Strax don't really interact until the end, and just, I would have loved to see those different brands of humor interact with each other, because they're both great on their own, but I imagine had they interacted with each other, it would have been absolutely amazing. My other big critique is you can't really listen to this story on its own. It is a direct sequel to A Spoonful of Mayhem, and you really need the context of what happened in this story to understand what's going on here. How Missy knows Oliver and Lucy, and how, what her plan ultimately was in A Spoonful of Mayhem, because her temporary jailer and probation officer, an alien named Cosmo, this story ends with Oliver, Lucy, and Strax releasing Cosmo to try and imprison Missy again. And so, you also need to listen to A Spoonful of Mayhem to know who Cosmo is. The side characters in this story are also fairly generic, aside from Oliver, Lucy, and Strax, there are 3 other side characters. There's Oliver's best friend at school, who, is like him, the shy, soft-spoken type who doesn't really fit in a military school. And the gung-ho student, Missy's lieutenant, as she calls him, who is essentially a bully. And then you have a general who she's trying to coerce to let her students go on military exercises, because Missy is trying to raise an army. Or is she? Yeah, it turns out the whole army thing was kind of a ruse so Missy could get a MacGuffin that she ultimately loses. What else was there? I know there was another point I wanted to make. But yeah, I would probably say Brimstone and Terror is the weakest story in this set because of its reliance on having heard A Spoonful of Mayhem and the weak side characters. There are still a ton of great moments throughout it, though. That brings us to the third story, Treason and Plot. Now, Treason and Plot was a lot of fun because, again, it kind of plays with a bunch of fun tropes. For example, now that the Master TARDIS is not working and her Vortex Manipulator is out of power, Missy finds herself stuck in... Oh shoot, what was the period? I think it was Victorian London? I don't remember, and hopefully someone will correct me, and thank you very much for that correction in advance. But basically, Missy recalls her adventure with the monk from Series 1, and what he was doing. He was now stuck in a time period, so he was basically trying to create anachronisms to draw the attention of the Time Lords. Now Missy is trying to do the same thing, only unlike the monk, she is trying to change the course of the gunpowder plot, which basically was, after, with King James on the throne following Queen Elizabeth, a bunch of Catholics, led by a man named Edward Catesby, tried to put gunpowder under the Houses of Parliament, to blow it up and install a Catholic on the throne. Of course, Catesby and his conspirators, including Guy Fawkes, famously, were all caught. Missy is trying to avert the course of history and make sure the gunpowder plot happens, again, hoping to draw the attention of the Time Lords and get her out of this time period. But, she doesn't know is that a time agent has been sent here. A young woman named Rita Cooper, a novice agent, and I kind of like, that she's kind of mad. She wanted to join the time agents to be a hero, but she's stuck on these mundane tasks. And apparently, as part of their initiation, every time agent has to do... every time agent has to do the gunpowder plot. Like, I know I keep saying it's funny, but all of Missy Series 2 is absolutely hilarious. There are also a lot of fun things in this story that we don't normally see. For example, Missy uses hypnosis, which I think prior to this point, she never did before. In particular, she hypnotizes Edward Catesby. And, she says, "I am your mistress, and you will obey me." And not gonna lie, Missy hypnotizing people, it's kind of hot. Anyway, so of course, despite Missy's best efforts, the plan is ultimately foiled through basically because everything gets plundered so bad. But this story ends with Missy being captured, which leads us to the finale of Series 2. Oh god, excuse me, sorry. The finale of Series 2, Too Many Masters. Missy, again, Brimstone and Terror, this is a sequel to another story from Series 1, Divorced, Beheaded, Regenerated. Missy has been captured by the meddling monk, who, wants revenge against Missy and is posing as the master. The really great thing about this story is the rapport between Rufus Hound and Michelle Gomez. They are absolutely glorious together. They're both very hammy and scenery chewing, and when they get together, it's so great. But before the monk can extract his revenge, they are both captured by the Ogrons, who want revenge on what the Master did for the events of Frontier in Space. Basically, the Master employed the Ogrons, and then the Daleks showed up, and the Master bailed, and he never paid them for their services. So they've been crudely hunting down time travelers, trying to find the Master, and, either enslave him, kill him, or have him pay their debts, which, with interest, is now one galaxy. And of course, because the monk was posing as the Master, they think he's the Master. Prior to this, I think we've only had 3 or 4 Ogron stories. Day of the Daleks, Frontier in Space, and The Romance of Crime. And in all 3 stories, they've been used the exact same way. They were just dumb henchmen, essentially. Dumb, brutish henchmen. This story, while keeping them dumb, brutish henchmen, really expands on the Ogrons, the same way Paper Cuts did for the Draconians. We see more of Ogron society. What was the phrasing in the Holy Terror? They have a polytheistic religion with a monotheistic approach. They worship several gods, but they only worship one at a time. For example, they mention that they had a rock god that was then eaten by a crab god that was then eaten by a bigger crab god. So currently, they are worshipping the bigger crab god. There is also a queen of the Ogrons. I do have to say I'm not the biggest fan of the Ogrons because they are really one note, and even with the expanding on their society and their race and stuff, there's not a lot you can do with the Ogrons, and they just Too Many Masters does have some great moments though. Like I said, the rapport between Missy and the monk, once again, like Divorced, Beheaded, Regenerated, they are trying to outdo each other, which ultimately Missy wins. And this story just goes to insane heights. And once again, while Missy is absolutely insane, there is this undertone of menace. For example, she mentions to the other captured time travelers, who the Ogrons are using as slaves, she will help them escape, and then proceeds to slaughter them in the escape attempt. And there are other great moments too, just like one of my favorite exchanges between the monk and Missy, for example, it happens right at the end. So Missy tries to steal the monk's TARDIS, but realizes he put something called a quantum lock on it, which means it'll only register to his controls. And as they're talking, he's like, "What happened? I put a quantum lock on my TARDIS." And then Missy's like, "But did you remember to put a quantum lock on the lock itself after you finished?" Which means that now the monk's TARDIS will only work with both of them controlling it. And this story ends with Missy taking the monk hostage, which of course will lead into Series 3 coming out later this year, Missy and the Monk. Missy Series 2 is just an absolute blast from start to finish. It's hard to say how I'd rank it overall. It's pretty much on par with Series 1. I would say Series 1 is ultimately better because Series 1 is very standalone, whereas Series 2 has two stories that are direct sequels to stories from Series 1, which means going in blind would not be the best idea. If I were to rank the stories of Series 2, my ranking would be Brimstone and Terror is the weakest, but still very enjoyable, then Too Many Masters, and then Treason and Plot, and then The Lumiat was my favorite story in this set. So, but those are just my opinions. Have you heard Missy Series 2? What did you think? Start a conversation in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. And in the description box below, you'll find the link to my Twitter, where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. And join me Sunday, June 20th at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, where I will be doing a live stream. You know, just something I want to do for fun, engage with my fans. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and hopefully I'll see you guys then.